This is MC Fireside Chats, a weekly show devoted to the outdoor hospitality industry, hosted by Brian Searl and Cara Csizmadia. You'll hear from special guests that focus on topics to help your business succeed, all backed by Modern Campground, the most innovative news source in the industry.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl with Insider Perks here, as always, with Cara Csizmadia from the Canadian Camping and RV Council. We've got our regular kind of campground owner-focused show happening again today, so we're pleased to welcome back Mr. Mike Harrison from CRR Lifestyle, as well as Duncan Winship from Papoose Pond. I believe we might be joined by Joe Duemig from that My Community. I'm not sure if he's just got busy and has other commitments or things like that, but hopefully he'll be joining us a little bit later in the show. And then we've got two special guests here with us today. We've got Nick Purslow, the business development consultant from Glampitect, who is a consulting firm in the UK, Nick, that is moving and expanding into all other kinds of places, right?
Yep.
I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself in 1 second. And then we've got Kevin and Isaac Rains here, who are the owners of Dappled Light Adventures, and they have glamping rentals that are located on 50 acres of privately owned property in Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. Super excited to talk to them. So I think the conversation may end up veering a little bit towards glamping, which we were having an interesting discussion before we got started, what it is and whether anyone here qualifies. Duncan, Mike, me, whoever else, cabins, whatever else. So we'll dive into those kinds of conversations and things like that. So just super excited to be here for another show. What's on the minds of, let's start by introducing yourselves. Nick, just tell us a little bit about what Glampitect is briefly, and then we'll give Kevin and Isaac the similar opportunity.
Thanks for having me on, Brian. I'm Nick. I work for Glampitect, which at the minute is a UK company, which was started in 2019. And essentially we help people start their own glamping businesses and whatever form that may take. So we started in 2019 after our two founders, Callum and Ali, set up their own glamping site in the UK, just a little 5-unit glamping site on the north coast of Scotland. They've got these little glamping pods, which are kind of like curved timber cabin kind of things. They're huge in the UK. We've been going for 2-3 years now, growing fast, and we're due to expand and launch Glampitect North America, which I'll be heading up next month. So keep an eye out on that. I'll be very busy on LinkedIn and mostly talking about the US and Canadian market. So keep an eye on that.
Awesome. Super excited to kind of dive into that with you in a little bit here. Kevin and Isaac. Isaac with a Z, who we misspelled in the Facebook post. Totally my fault.
No worries. It happens all the time. So I'm Kevin. I'm Dad, and we bought a property. Our family did about 17 years ago, and we'll get my family outside. We lived in a pretty urban area, so I wanted to get Isaac and his two sisters outside on weekends and over spring breaks and that kind of thing. So it kind of just was a 50 acres of raw land. It had a driveway on it, and we just started cutting trails, and Isaac and I haul firewood out of the woods, and when he was 8 and 9, just do little projects around the property, create fire rings and that kind of thing. Over time, it went from tent camping to a trailer to a yurt to a cabin, and then over the last year, Isaac has developed it into a full-fledged glamping business that has 7 structures on the property now.
Awesome. Congratulations. That's pretty cool. I was telling you before the show, I think I've been to Kentucky and Daniel Boone National Forest and kind of driven all through the state parks there. And in addition to having a beautiful state park system, it's just a beautiful state to be in and be a part of. So super excited. Maybe you can share some pictures with us a little bit later. We'd love to kind of visualize that in addition to chatting with you. But before we get into these gentlemen's stories from Glampitect and Kevin and Isaac's story, Duncan, Mike, is there anything that's come across your desk in the last month since we've had you on the show from a campground owner perspective that you think we should be paying attention to?
Well, certainly from our perspective is forecast, perhaps, short term, what does it look like? I'm on Mark Kep's, forum as well. And, across the country, based on the gas prices and inflation and And it seems universally everyone in that forum posted they're down. Doesn't mean they're down, from 2 years ago, but certainly the pace has slowed a little bit. The on fire, nature of what the camping industry has seen, certainly in the short term anyway, seems a little bit slower. So that's something we're monitoring. Is it just a 30, 60 day? Will people kind of see what happens with gas prices and inflation? Because our pace for next year is still booking, but certainly slowed down a little bit. So that's something we're keeping a very, very close eye on.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing, Mike. Like, and I've had calls with you and some of our other clients at Insider Perks. I'm actually pulling up right now. I just wanted to see because I think the Fed was going to announce their announcement right now, right? Like literally at the same time. Yep,
Right.
increase the interest rate by 0.75 percentage point. So they just did that 5 minutes ago. So that was kind of expected in the market. But yeah, inflation is definitely a big topic, and it's really interesting. Kind of some of the things we're seeing. We discussed on the show previously. I don't know how far we want to deep dive into it, but.
One thing that we've kind of noticed up here in New England is that we've actually seen people park the trailer or looking to, keep it parked, or have gone back to the classic tents. Like tent booking is up quite a bit over previous years than we've seen in the past. Like it was definitely RV driven last year and the year before, but now we're seeing people bringing and packing out the canvas again, which is kind of fascinating. And brings a different kind of style of camping. It puts a lot more demand on some of your other amenities when you have a lot of tenters in the park. It definitely puts a lot more use on the bathhouses, puts a lot more use of a lot more ice. So you got to make sure you keep on top of some of those amenities, that kind of thing. So it's still looking like it's going to be a great summer, but the clientele that we may see may be a little morphic than what we've seen the last two seasons.
I'm curious.
Go ahead, Cara. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to speculate, I guess, about after last year and everyone kind of having these really difficult time, like really busy and nowhere near enough staff. Do we feel like this will translate to a little bit less pressure on the staffing side for this summer that will alleviate some of that? Or nope, can't even, nope. Hands down, no. There's just still not enough staff, not enough people, not enough.
Not yet. I mean, last month there were the jobs report. There was 11 million open jobs and 5.5 million available employees. Right. That really hasn't changed yet. I mean, now obviously as things are step process, right? So depending on what happens with the Fed rate, depending on what happens with inflation, there's going to be some kind of slowdown, which will clearly indicate what happens. But the RV industry isn't going to slow down to the point where, hey, we're cutting staff. And I mean, it's still a very healthy industry, and we're very tied into the hotel industry, as well. And the indicators are still good, and the RV and camping, still is the most affordable vacation people can take. So, our outlook is this is a short term. I want you to define a short term, I guess, is relative to everybody, a short term condition. But still, extremely healthy industry, and which means staffing we still have challenges with.
Yeah, I've heard across the spectrum from different hotel operators that this is the best summer they've ever had in the history of forever. I remember Hilton Corporate is saying that, and some of the local people that we know that own franchises and things like that. And I think that one thing that's important to hit on before we kind of move on from this topic, because I don't want to focus again on inflation too much because we've touched on it in previous shows, although it is important, is that you're saying that, yeah, you're down from last year, but you're up 30% from 2020 or 2019. And so in hindsight, if you cut out this chunk of time that is really hopefully never going to repeat itself again, we're doing really good as an industry still.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on from inflation real quick and talk about, I guess we should probably focus on glamping. Is there anything else, Duncan, that came across your desk that you wanted to touch on before we kind of shift gears here?
No, I mean, that's really about it. It's just the pivoting away from as many RVs and into tents again. Cabin rentals still are doing really well as we kind of pivot to talk about glamping, at least for us. But we've had cabin rentals now for close to 50 years. So it's definitely been something that we've had in our business model from almost the very beginning.
How old are you, Duncan?
Me? Nah, the park is way older than I am. She's
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I'm just giving you a little tease there, Duncan. So, no, yeah.
I'm a good
Continue, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think that there's still a ton of demand for that. I think some people have pivoted back to hotels as you're seeing some of that hotel demand really bounce back. Like everyone tried camping last year, and now they're trying hotels again this year, and then it'll be curious to see kind of how it levels back out the following year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's got peaks and valleys as it goes. And consumer behavior is very amorphic at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and again, like I really like we should talk about this more. We just don't want to focus every single show on it because the behavior is really interesting to me because you would assume that just like in 2008, people would take less long trips and they would stay more close to home. But the searches we've seen for people in radiuses around parks like campgrounds near me, RV parks near me is actually down the last 2 weeks over the last 2 weeks and the last 30 days over the last 30 days, which is an indicator that in general, people are not looking for places closer to home. And so we don't know if they're splurging on those longer RV trips, like they're splurging on hotel vacations, like we're reading about, if they're just not traveling at all, if they're waiting till the kids get out of school. There's so many different things that are kind of confluencing all together. And it's hard for us to discern the behavior. It's so rapidly changing.
Well, in our season, sorry.
No worries. The fog of war lays thick upon the land.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let me write that down.
Yeah.
You like that little sound bite?
I did. That was good.
That's
Duncan.
good. Yeah, we can pull that out and put it on like a social. We're talking about that, pulling out quotes and putting it on social graphics. So that'll be our first one.
There you go. The fog of war lays thick upon the land.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's an interesting dynamic. I think it's all obviously, so many gears kind of turning at once in the machine and compounded by, arguably for a lot of us, a really short season. So it ends up being typically hindsight when we're kind of assessing how things went, which can be one of the biggest hurdles of this industry for sure.
Well, let's pivot here in a second. Talk to, I think this is maybe a good segue. Isaac and Kevin, you introduced yourself, told us a little bit about your business, and I want to learn how you got started and things like that. But very briefly, just help me with my segue here, right? Do you see that any of this is impacting your glamping business or the other people that you talk to who are your colleagues who do the same thing?
So not yet, and the main reason is because we've only been operational for one quarter now, so only a few months. So for us, it's hard to track any trends because we just opened. So unfortunately, we're not the experts yet on those types of trends. But I can say that we are well above projections, and our projections were based on kind of what's in the area and what other people are renting, type structures, cost per night. We went a little under that even, and our revenue is still above projections. So we haven't seen it just yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if there is a bit of a dip. For us, there's some seasonality as well. So we're going to get completely bonkers fall because the eastern woodlands have beautiful colors that come out in the fall. And then we dip a little bit in the winter, strong in the spring, dip a little bit in the summer because of heat. So we're kind of a little bit of a roller coaster effect through the year. But as of right now, not to counter anything that's been said thus far, but we're above projections, thankfully.
Well, that's why I'm glad we have you guys on the call, right? Because the glamping industry is kind of one of those unique hybrid industries between hotels and between camping. And so while we're seeing hotels have blowout quarters, campgrounds are obviously doing very well still. There's no question about that. They're just down from 21. And so it's kind of an interesting discussion that we might be able to have here on a middle ground of are you leaning closer to the hotel side, or are you leaning closer to the campground side, or are you carving your own niche? Nick, what have you seen? I know you talked to a ton of businesses, both in the UK and soon in the States.
Yeah, so in terms of macro trends, I think it was what you were saying earlier, Brian, in terms of the pandemic sort of launched it into the stratosphere a little bit. And like there was a huge boom last summer, certainly in the UK, and maybe to a lesser degree this summer, but certainly the way the industry has developed, especially in the UK, it's sort of in that self into the consciousness really. And it's even though there's maybe a slight dip from last summer, there's certainly been a huge difference between now and 2-3 years ago, where it was more of a niche. In the US, the US is probably 2-3-4 years behind the UK in terms of maturity of the glamping industry. But again, the COVID issues helped with sort of etching it into the consciousness, and it's certainly got plenty of legs left to go, I think, on sort of the overall macro trends. In terms of the inflation, the impact of that, I'm not so sure on that, to be honest, and you guys on the ground would be better to know about that. But macro trends, certainly, it's continuing to grow. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity you gave me and kind of pivot topics away from inflation, right? So let's talk about glamping in the UK first, because it interests me that obviously your company started over there. You're now coming over to the States. Why do you feel like the glamping industry is more, I mean, obviously it is, I believe you, but is more established, has gotten more legs, has had more years to run in the UK and to a certain extent Europe than it has in the States?
Okay, so first, really, just anecdotally, when someone asks me what I do for work, and I'll say, the first question I'll say is, do you know what glamping is? And almost everyone in the UK says, yeah, I know what glamping is. I asked the same question in the US, and it's a lot more hit and miss. So I was literally speaking today to some insurance providers who looking to get some professional liability insurance for when we launch. And I said to 2 different providers, do you know what glamping is? And they said, no, not really. So just on the sort of national consciousness, it's less of a thing. And also just the number of people wanting to start their own site. It's sort of, there was a big boom a couple of years ago in the UK, and you hear more and more people saying, there's more and more people getting into it in the US, but just probably to a lesser degree than the UK currently. But if you look at the research that's been done by these research companies, it's projected to just go and go and go and go for a minimum of the next decade.
So how do you define glamping? I'm going to put you on the spot. How does Nick define glamping?
Me personally, I think it deserves quite a broad interpretation. Well, it means glamorous camping. That's what the word means. And to me, that means anything really where you don't have to pitch your own tent, and there's a relative degree of luxury. Some will say, it should only be tented structures, like, no canvas tents. I personally think it should incorporate things like glamping pods, which are timber structures, which certainly have become popular in the UK, and also yurts, geodesic domes, and that kind of thing. So I think it deserves quite a broad interpretation, and is up to sort of the site owner and the guests to determine.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that whether it includes cabins or not that have been traditional and, like Duncan was saying, has been around at his property specifically for more than 50 years, I think is where I'm not sure. I think it very easily could, but yeah, I think it should be an all-encompassing term, basically, that encompasses everything outside of the RV stay, right, and the tent stay. The basic, I'm setting up a tent I buy from Walmart or wherever stay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Cara, what do you think? Oh, go ahead, Duncan.
I think that just speaks to how we set guest expectations. That's always a part of all this, is what does the guest expect when it goes to a glamping either property or a glamping location inside of a larger property? What do they expect the outside to look like? What do they expect the inside to look like? And what do they expect, if any, additional amenities that are specific to that? Like, you have some places that do glamping where they have a guy who comes out and does a s'more buffet for you at your site. Is that glamping, or is that like Uber glamping? Is that just a whole other level beyond what we think of when we talk about glamping? And I think all hospitality suffers under defining their guest expectations. Because of it, like there's a big difference between a Ritz-Carlton and a Hilton Garden Inn, and they both serve different purposes, but they're both considered hotels. So I feel we run into a similar issue with glamping.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. So I'm currently writing a book on. I've interviewed lots of glamping site owners and just basically getting their words of wisdom and advice on things that people should do when they set up the site. And one common thing that I've heard from a lot of site owners is one of the biggest issues, as you say there, Duncan, is failing to set those expectations. So people maybe who want to try glamping for the first time are expecting, hotel bellboy level service. When a lot of the times that's not the case. It can be the case, but most sites generally a lot tend to sort of just let you leave and enjoy the nature and some seclusion and in some slightly nice accommodation. Whereas when people don't necessarily put that on their website and in their marketing, and then the guests come and say, "Well, where's my service?" and all this, it can cause them problems and lead to some bad reviews. So I'd certainly agree with that one.
I mean, I don't know about anybody here, but I'm expecting a s'more buffet everywhere I go glamping.
Well, but I think that's part of the, glamping is a relatively new industry, right? And so education and communication and marketing to the guest is important. It's no different than when the Residence Inn brand or an extended stay brand came out for hotels. People didn't understand what that was and that it was going to have a kitchen and, what did you do? I mean, I remember, 10 years ago when I would go camping and I'd have my air mattress. My Marine buddy would make fun of me and, "Oh, you're glamping," right? With my air mattress and my LED light, not my little propane lantern. And so now depending on what to your point, depending on what level of glamping is defined by the consumer. And we've got 3 different glamping options on our properties, whether it's a wagon, whether it's a cover luxury tent, or whether it's a cabin. So really educating and providing that information to the guest of what the experience is. It's no different than an Airbnb, right? You can go to an Airbnb and, what are you getting? Is it going to be a full house that's got 6 bedrooms and you got your own yard, or the downstairs 1-bedroom studio apartment where people are, running up above you. And so I think that's key, is educating kind of what your glamping option and what you're providing.
Well, you're talking about expectations, right? There's 2 different types of expectations in my mind. There's the consumer expectation of what glamping is as a whole, and that's obviously still being defined and probably will be for years. And it doesn't help that we don't have the Residence Inns, the Ritz-Carltons, the Aloft hotels, the unique brands. Obviously, we've got KOA and Jellystone, but we don't really have those unique individual, larger developed brands yet. Maybe that comes one day, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But so there's that consumer expectation or perspective, just like the hotel industry drove toward online reservations, and now people expect that from the camping industry, and so on and so forth. They expect you to be available to answer Facebook messages, stuff like that. And then there's the brand or the expectation that you set at your property that we've talked about, which is that kind of individual branding of, this is what glamping is to me at my property, and this is what you can expect. So I don't know how we go ahead. Sorry.
It'll be curious to see how it goes in the next couple of years, because there's a couple of businesses out there that are really kind of entered and are growing. I think we see Huttopia is one. I think Auto Camp is another one. And I'm sure there's another 1 or 2 that I am missing right off the top.
Under Canvas. Yeah, there's several that are focused specifically on glamping, type businesses. And, I think that's, Brian, you and I have had this conversation multiple times. It's one of the challenges that the industry has to evolve to, is there isn't an Expedia.com, for the campground industry, where one site where everybody kind of goes and say, "Hey, I want to stay," there's probably 50, right? Yep. And where do you go to choose your different options? And there's a new startup that seems like every month of, now there's Hip Camp, right? And so, which one do you go on? So I think there will be an evolution. There'll be a consolidation, of the industry, especially once more institutional money comes in, and starts to really, adopt and absorb, some of these other smaller or startup companies. That's going to happen for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, the shifts that are changing throughout the whole place. So I'm really interested to see what happens and what goes on. I was going to give Isaac and Kevin, I feel like they were trying to get our attention by jumping in and out and turning their camera sideways, like they wanted to talk. But now they're gone, and so I can't give them a chance to talk anymore. So hopefully they'll come back and we'll get a chance to talk about their property and things like that. Nick, tell us why expand into the U.S. now? What's
It was the natural next step, really. So obviously we're growing rapidly in the UK. My business partner now, who founded the company originally, is in the Middle East currently, and that's a completely different market. But the US has just seemed like the natural next step. It started really quite trivially. We were at the Glamping Show UK in September last year, and after the show we had a few drinks, and I just said to him, "Let me crack America." So that's where it all started, really. But just because of the way the industry is going over here, and obviously compared to the UK, everything is so much more professional, and everyone seems so much more business savvy, and that's not in the UK at all. It's just there's a different broader business culture over here in the US. So it just seemed like the natural next step, and having done the research and seen, more and more interest in glamping in the US, it was and Canada. It was just the natural next step, really.
Well, so I know, and I want you to talk a little bit about the need for the types of services that you offer, right? Because we've seen this in the campground industry, especially over the last few years, as new people have gotten into it and sort of some know what they're doing, some don't know what they're doing, some have absolutely no clue what they're doing. I've heard stories about, I think we talked about sometime on this show, I think Sandy brought it up on one of our shows, our first of the month shows, where somebody had developed a campsite that had all 90-degree sites. And so there's been campground consultants that have popped up throughout the industry to offer best practices, advice. There's management groups, there's all kinds of experts that you can count on. And so in your mind, when you've got the American Glamping Association, when you've got Glamping Hub, when you've got all those kinds of different resources that are available out there to you, what is the benefit of working with a company like yours or a consultancy in general to start a glamping business?
I think the first thing is it's such a niche industry at the minute, where there's very little. The American Glamping Association is doing a great job, but there's not too much sort of culture around it. There's not too many news sites around glamping, and it's hard to know where to look when you want to start. So I think having someone to hold your hand as you work through the process and tell you about the different hurdles that can be in place is useful. I certainly know, the founders of Glampitect UK, they were desperately crying out for something like that when they started their business in 2018, and they needed, they made so many mistakes along the way for their own glamping site that they would have avoided if they had someone who had been there and done it before. So I think, companies like ourselves and the American Glamping Association, anyone who either has done it before or has worked, and spoken to a lot of people who have done it before, can be just a really useful guide, and also putting out content that can help people, even if you don't necessarily use our services. We're looking to get lots of blogs and guides out there just to, help people sort of through the journey and just educate them a little bit more.
Okay, awesome. Mike and Duncan, I'm curious, and maybe to a lesser extent Duncan, as we already talked about, is it glamping or is it not at your property? But let's just start with Mike. With your wagons and your other glamping accommodations, do you feel like it would have been beneficial to have a consultant to work with? Did you work with a consultant that maybe I'm just not aware of? How much research was involved? Things like that.
So it's always beneficial to reach out for expertise and to touch on people who have experience and utilize the resources. With our hospitality background and our experience already that we had with cabins, we kind of went off on our own a little bit. And we obviously built some financial models. I did a lot of different research and looked at different resources. Looked at the the glamping convention, the different RVIC convention, and so we had deep dove into various different options. And really, I think it's funny, we were consulting with another ownership group for third party management, and they were looking at this resort, and they wanted to have gosh, I think it was 250 park model, all vacation rental, transient type lodging models, right? And so when we were going through the pro forma with them, we asked them, do you have any, commercial laundry, to source? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, how are you going to launder 250? I mean, it's in essence, like, think about a hotel room, right? Do you have, specs for purchasing linen, 3 pairs of linen for 250? And they hadn't thought about, all the different operational constraints that happens when you add all the glamping. So I think our hospitality background lent itself to what we wanted to do, and as well as our construction and our financial background. I think the only thing that perhaps we could have looked at a little bit more was, what are the different options that we could select? I think we landed perfectly on what works for us in Camp Verde, which is those covered wagons and the Lux tents, right? We're in Verde Ranch, and so the covered wagons are just, they fit. As we expand into the other markets that are in different, geographical locations, perhaps, I mean, it's been pretty cool to see I was looking at Nick's website earlier and seeing those curved, wooden huts, if you will. And so there's so many different kinds. I think really what we've determined is what works with your infrastructure and kind of your existing operational load and utilities, is the best fit combined with what your market demands. What is the guest, what is the guest looking for? So for example, in Coachella, you and I, we've done this deep dive of, are people searching for a cabin, a cottage, or vacation rental? Right. And we determined that the number one search term was vacation rental. Right. So does cabin and cottage really fit there? And so what we've landed on is, our best glamping option there is probably an Airstream. Right. Coachella, Palm Springs. And so the covered wagons don't fit for that type of customer and market. So I think it does help, depending on your breadth of experience, to certainly use the different resources. And some of those resources are consultants and experts. But we also like to make mistakes on our own and learn as well, which we have done plenty. But I definitely reached out to several people when we were kind of landing on what we wanted to do.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic, and I'm interested to get Duncan's take on this too. Like as an existing campground owner, you're right. I mean, I don't know for sure because I've never owned a campground, but you have that hospitality experience built in, whether it's RV sites or whether it's cabins or tents or decorating, landscaping, organizing all the people, getting all the resources, gathering them, deploying them. And so I think that in that case, glamping is different in the type of accommodation and the logistics that you're talking about, figuring out laundry and things like that. But other than that, if you've got that hospitality experience, I don't think it's too much of a different pivot for you. Would you agree with that, Duncan, or no?
I would agree. I feel that if you're at least in a outdoor hospitality industry and you already have some cabins or park models or some kind of stick structure, in addition to existing RV sites and existing tent sites, depending on how deep you want to go into it, it's not a huge step up operationally. I think the laundry is Mike's best point, that's really something that you have to take a serious look at. And you have to take a serious look at it both on the local level and state level, because sometimes they start getting involved when you start providing commercial laundry, public linens, that kind of thing. So there's a couple of little minefield items out there that can exist, but beyond that, I feel like it's something you can definitely add to your park.
I mean, you could just have the rustic experience, Mike, at Verde. If you're doing wagons and you're kind of going the old school route, you could just have people wash the sheets in the river.
Well, as part of the research that we had done is, there's a KOA up there that, the beds aren't made, right? It's the bed in the bag product, and they just put it on. And we had decided, we didn't want to do that, right? So we spec'd our own linens, and, there's a coverlet and a runner and a wagon wheel table. And so, I think what mistakes can owners and operators make is if you don't understand those operational implications, it can be a significant costly error, because the labor that's involved, in these cabins, depending on who's staying there, is it a family of 6 and are they there for 4 weeks, or is it just a couple in there for a weekend? I mean, it could take 4 hours to clean a cabin. If you don't understand your market, all of a sudden your labor has quadrupled, from what you anticipated, and then your utilities that are involved with that, utilities involved with all the commercial, the chemicals, the laundry. I mean, there are so many different factors that people don't anticipate that can really impact what your projected ROI or IRR was on the project, that I think, is really key. So the hospitality thing, I think, to Duncan's point, people figure out, right? Oh, do we want to provide a cowboy hat with our wagon and a s'mores experience and, all that kind of fun stuff? People will get that dialed in pretty quickly. It's the operational mechanisms that I can see Mr. Rains kind of grinning. So I think probably they've experienced that as well as they found out some of their adventures. Just kind of find out along the way sometimes, right?
Well, we'll give them, yeah, let's give Isaac and Kevin a chance to pop in here. We saw you guys like flashing your camera, moving it around, trying to get our attention like you wanted to talk. So, but then you disappeared every time I tried to give it to you. So
that was definitely because we were jonesing to talk, not because we're bad with technology or off the grid or anything like that. Yeah, operations stuff. I forget who mentioned. I think it might have been Mike who mentioned liking to make mistakes and learn that way. Relying on mentors and that type. We have a few mentors that but we definitely are more on the try things, make some mistakes, and learn on that front. And some of the operations stuff has been some big painful learnings. So stuff is simple.
Talk a little bit about your process is what I was just going to say, and you beat me to it.
So stuff is bedding, like he was mentioning, figuring out how to get that amount of bedding done throughout the week. You know, if we have 7 structures and people are booking throughout the week, multiple night stays and that type of thing, like that is a lot of laundry, even if we don't have 250 units. So finding people on the ground near us has been probably the biggest thing for us, especially since we manage pretty remotely. The stuff that we've learned from the biggest thing has been cleaning, I think, the cleaning side of things. So again, it comes down to having a team that we really like in our area who just takes good care of us, and then making sure that I have all of my checklists lined up right and I'm ticking down on those. I kind of lost the plot a little bit.
All right.
You want to add anything to that?
I think you nailed it. I mean, for us, it's like, it feels like the proverbial building the plane while you're flying moment, because we're right in the beginning stages, and we've had some misses. So while we were working on our barn, we had to park some of our ATVs and UTVs outside, and kind of a horror story. One of our guests found the keys, even though we had thought really well, got the UTV, went on a joyride, rolled the UTV. I mean, that was within our first month of operation. So learning some things about like security,
hiding keys,
screening guests better. Again, a real simple thing was we had 5 single beds in our cabin. So we have 1 cabin and 5 glamp sites. The cabin, we had 5 single beds in it. And so there was young men in their, late teens, early 20s renting the cabin and splitting that cost amongst them. But that lent itself to a lot of partying. So when we figured that out, we put a queen size bed in there and a cot for people's children. Just by changing the structure up, it allowed us to have more families and couples.
So how do you get started in Daniel Boone National Forest, right? I can imagine that there are all these people, and I've seen them on the American Glamping Association calls and talked to them in various other places, who are starting these glamping businesses, and they would love to have, sure, throw me in Daniel Boone National Forest. That's an amazing landscape. So are you lucky enough to get that, one? But 2, how do you decide to do it right there?
Yeah, for us, again, it was a happy accident in many ways. We bought the property 17 years ago. We bought 50 acres for $50,000. It was $1,000 an acre, which in this territory now, it's probably $6,000 or $7,000 an acre minimum, with major development and restaurants kind of coming in around us. So we kind of landed in the right spot before the development, and then we've been around us. So there's zip lines and kayaking and restaurants come over the last probably 8 to 10 years. So for us, we just kind of saw the opportunity to launch in. I had 5 auto body shops. We would fix wrecked cars. I did that for about 18 years. Had a staff of 75 people. A competitor came in and bought me out. And Isaac and I kind of looked at each other and said, hey, we have this raw land and a ton of resources. why don't we launch something new? So here we are, month 3, and we're figuring it out as we go. So hopefully we'll have better stories and better answers a year from now. But right now, we are just thrilled to be in this together as father and son.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been at this for
Yes.
13 years, and I still am learning things as I go. So, yeah, it never stops, but it's always an interesting process. So,
I think really quick, I
What
want to
else?
add to what he was saying. Sorry about that.
No,
I just wanted to say, in terms of the how do you decide kind of where to go? Obviously, our decision was kind of made for us in some ways, but as we've looked for future opportunities and are kind of trying to think, plan, we love the fact that where we are right now, we're situated really close to Red River Gorge, Kentucky, which is like some of the world-class climbing, hiking, views, all that type of stuff. So I think that like area is huge. If you find a place that has some sort of attraction, whatever that might be, or some pull to the people in surrounding states, obviously that seems pretty obvious, but it's been huge in our first quarter of, it's been huge in giving us a successful first quarter so far. Like, I'm confident that our location has a huge impact on why people have not been scared to come out and stay with us.
It's been the wind in the sail.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, and we're talking about location, right? And obviously, you guys, 17 years ago, you said you purchased the property?
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, so yeah, you kind of purchased the property, probably, I'm guessing, in anticipation of something that you might be able to use it for in the future, having no idea what you would do with it now. But there's that kind of buying land, and I don't want to say getting lucky, but having the foresight to realize the potential of something. And there's we talked to somebody who's in, I think, Colorado, maybe Washington State, who's starting up a glamping business, and his idea is that, well, I've got 2 pieces of land, one in, and again, I don't know if it's Colorado, Washington. I feel like it's Washington. That's where the Cascades are, I feel like. But so near the Cascade Mountains, and he's going to do that in the summer. They're going to be pop-up temporary glamping units, and then he's going to take those glamping units and drive them south for the winter and open up there. And it's an interest. I don't know that it's going to work. I don't know how he's going to brand it separately from season to season, how he's going to change addresses, do all those kinds of things. We're working through some of those things with him, but it's an interesting, does permanence have to be a thing? Obviously, if you're buying land, of course, but is it an option to do something like this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's
Oh, sorry.
I can step it all over you. Go ahead.
Please, Duncan, please.
I think it just speaks to the local and state governances and what they really want. At least here in Maine, there's a fair amount of governmental regulation around both camping and hospitality, and so a semi-permanent traveling glamping camping structure is a fascinating concept. But where do you hang the business name on the door, like that kind of thing?
Yeah.
We and I were going to say the same things, Duncan. I think knowing the jurisdictional barriers to operation here in Canada, obviously I'm not familiar with how things are in the States, but up here it would be very difficult, I think, to operate in that way. And I think, there's also jurisdictional barriers. I saw a comment on LinkedIn or Facebook maybe asking about if campgrounds and parks allow tiny homes. I obviously can't speak for every park, but there are definite limitations to having a tiny home structure on an RV or recreational outdoor hospitality site, kind of on a long-term basis for the vast majority of our parks. If they have operating permit ability to accept a tiny home on the property, there will be limitations to how many and all kinds of, most campgrounds in this country have operation limitations for times of year. So you can only be open for X amount of days of the year. and things like that, unless you have special negotiation with your county. So there's all sorts of regulatory stuff that stands in the way of getting really creative. I think, I'd argue that this industry is very good at finding ways to be creative while functioning within that regulatory framework. But it would be tough to launch something like that up here. I think there's lots of ways to get around stuff, but those regulations and things are in place for a reason, and it's not always the way we want it to be. Like, we wish it could be the Wild West still, and just camp wherever we want, whenever we want.
Well, yeah, there's no doubt that regulations serve a purpose in some cases, but it's interesting. I was having a Slack conversation with somebody earlier today about the changing face of the industry and how it's been kind of slow moving for the last 25-ish years. And at least in this guy's opinion, in the next 5 years, it's going to move the same speed as it did that whole 25 years. And that's not just from an owner evolution, glamping, changing mindset, consumer perspective and expectations. It's from a, do the regulatory agencies keep up with those things?
Well, and
go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to just say, I think our associations are doing a great job of communicating with regulatory bodies. And I also think situations like with Isaac and Kevin, where you've got this fairly rural location, but you've got several operators now establishing, the natural landscape is a beautiful attraction, but then you've got accommodations providers popping up there. You've got the zipline guys and stuff like that, really shifting that, like Randy Hendrickson says all the time, sell the zip code. They're building that zip code, in my opinion, to be something that now will motivate those regulatory decision makers to better work in your favor, because your businesses are driving so much economic value for the area. And so I would argue that the more successful our parks and things are, coupled with our advocacy efforts at the association levels and things like that, where we are making big strides to have those regulatory bodies better understand how the business works and how much economic impact comes from this industry specifically. There's big changes happening. I completely agree with whoever your mystery person is, that long-winded stuff that was happening over the last 20 years is going to speed up here as we look for things like economic diversification and that kind of thing.
Mike, how do you view the industry changing? I know you're kind of at the forefront here of driving some of that change. So,
well, I think it has to, the interesting thing that will be, that everyone's going to watch is, Cara is being a little bit of the Grinch, right? Stamping on the creativity of, I can't work. But she's right. I mean, in California, for example, you can't have a tent with a bathroom, right? And so like our Lux tents wouldn't work there. But at the same time, what I love about this industry is there's so much diversity of, a small 7 glamping unit spot to, large under canvas 150 unit, with $595 a night, price tags. And I think as more and more people see this industry as being sexy, outdoor hospitality, outdoor recreation is very broad. It can be a small mom and pop, but it can also be larger. And I think what will happen is, again, over the course of 3 to 5 years, you've heard me mention numerous times, one of the large hospitality companies, whether it's a Marriott, or Hilton, someone is going to buy up, one of these other subsidiary companies, and it will really escalate, right? Because then you have full diversity of distribution platforms and marketing. And, because it is a profitable, industry, the margins are comparable or better to a lot of the hospitality or lodging sectors. The barriers to entry are a little bit tougher. That would be my dog, Brian. Sorry about that. But I do think, the technology continues to improve and increase. And, we've been working with CampSpot on evolving, a lot of their different deliverables and products and reporting. The way we approach the business, we've been talking to several other, similar to companies to us that are, you want to call them family, owner operated, but are evolving. We're all doing the same things: revenue management, marketing enhancement, adding a new perspective to the business. And so there will definitely be a change of the mom and pop places absolutely have a place in this industry, but I feel like it's almost going
Yes.
like the Home Depot and the local hardware store, thing from 25 years ago, where there's going to be a slower migration that these, other larger industries are going to continue to grow and evolve and develop as it becomes more profitable, more marketable. I mean, what was the RVIA report, Brian? $148 billion industry. Economic impact to the country. You cannot ignore that. So the industry has to change, in order to be competitive, to retain and attract the best employees, to obtain and attract the best, marketing, efforts. But we're pretty excited to be a part of that. But we also want to maintain that personal, feel as well. So a long answer to a short question, but.
No, but you bring up some excellent points. I mean, we've talked about technology multiple times on the phone. Everybody here knows that I'm a very big geek. Like, I was reading this morning on the internet. Virginia launches the world's biggest 3D print housing project, and obviously, we're not talking about housing here, but we are in some ways with cabins and glamping and vacation rentals and things like that. And these things can be printed in, I think they said 48 hours. They've already built one here, and so. I don't want to take up too much of the show talking about Virginia housing, but what I'm talking about and what I've said to people before is this is how you're going to eventually put cabins and glamping units at your campground and your RV park. There's no reason to pay $5,000 plus to have it shipped to you when you can download a schematic and print it. And I'm not saying you're going to own a printer at your campground, but there will be a local Home Depot that you can rent a commercial printer from, probably, that can come out to your campground for a day or a week and print all your accommodations. And that's going to give you unlimited flexibility. It's going to change how you do business. It's going to change the margins of it. It's just one thing of so many that you touched on, Mike.
Yeah. Look, Randy's in the chat here.
This is why you can't mention him every time. He gets too much, like.
I'm giving Randy a constant plug. But he and I have so many good conversations, and he's such a great communicator about stuff that, that his stuff really sticks in my head typically. But he's been a great champion of the industry, and I think that it's folks like him that kind of have helped start to accelerate things over those last 25 years and continue to do so into the future for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating where we're going.
Yeah.
Duncan, where do you see it? Where do you see it all going? How will you and Papoose Pond evolve?
We already evolve. We look at what some of the larger corporations are already doing and adapt. We are doing dynamic pricing. We do lots of reporting. That's one thing that I do weekly. And then a whole other form, bi-monthly and then monthly and then, end of year and all that kind of stuff to quickly pivot. I mean, that's one thing I feel like coming out of COVID, everyone should have learned is that you need to adapt and be able to adapt quickly. It used to be that you'd kind of have a economic headwind, at least for us, since we're seasonal for the season. You kind of get a vibe for starting May, June, and it would be the same all the way through October. But very much now it is a monthly, weekly ebb flow. You just don't know what it's going to be. And I think just being able to pivot and evolve quickly is going to be the strongest asset for anybody in the hospitality industry moving forward in the next 5 years.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, 100%. I still get frustrated by we're going to hire a marketing company and do a survey study and we'll get back to you in 6 months with the results of what we could do in an email if we just went back and forth. That costs $60,000 to do. So yeah, being like you said, adaptable, being able to pivot, being able to execute and complete things in a short period of time while still obviously doing your research and being knowledgeable and not making hasty decisions is definitely a skill that is invaluable in today's business world.
Keeping the pulse of your own business, your own bookings are coming in. How are people booking? How long they're staying is I think, a very valuable tool. And I think it's sometimes underutilized at the organic mom and pop level. that they'll need to continue really work on as larger entities enter the space that have people with the bandwidth to dive into that data and really make decisions driven out of it.
I would argue too that I say this often to campground members just during my day-to-day association work who are resistant to moving to reservation, like booking software and park management software and things like that, is, you know, we immediately kind of have this barrier in front of us about like, well, I want to be in control of my booking dynamics and all of those things and whatnot. So that shuts the door sometimes. But those things, Duncan, that you're saying, that ability to measure all those metrics, I would argue is far bigger, far more valuable a tool even than, you know, online bookability.
For us, like back in 2018, we had online bookings, but they only accounted for about 20% of total bookings at the park.
Yep.
Here, sitting in 2022, online bookings is 86% of our bookings at the park. So we have a lot more bandwidth on our phone and our phone staff to give that customer service and control that a lot of mom and pop shops really love to do. You love to be able to talk to your guests, talk to your regulars. Well, the fact that someone can self-serve and book it themselves gives you then the opportunity to either help answer for questions for your specialty one, someone who has like a lot of questions or has a specific need that a computer can't fill, and gives you both the bandwidth and time to be able to do that for them, therefore giving you even better customer service. I'll also say that, Brian asked me before the show how old I am. I said I'm 40 years old, but I know that myself and younger generations really prefer to do stuff on the computer than call a phone. You know, there's definitely, when we onboard newer staff, the phone can be a intimidating moment for them just because it's not something they've done since they were little.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think those tools that come along with automating and finding a really great software partner are so valuable. I don't even think, I know for me, I hadn't even, when I first transitioned to using a dedicated park management software, I couldn't have even comprehended the amount of variable data I was able to keep track of, and then really use that data to strategize going forward about how I was going to do the pivoting and the necessary things that I didn't even know I was going to need to do. It's great to have those tools and so valuable to, certainly in my opinion, even more valuable than just bookability.
Well, that's the thing, is you don't know what you don't know, right? And I was talking to somebody last week, one of our larger group clients, about, you know, yes, you may like this reservation software or this CRM or this, you know, database collection or this social media tool or whatever you're using, right? But for you or anybody else to stop and say, oh, I can't do this because this software doesn't let me do it, is, to me, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Okay, that doesn't mean you have to switch software, but go find a tool that does what you want it to do. And I think so many people are constrained by the limitations of whatever software, and that's not just reservation software, right? To be clear, that's dozens of different things.
Absolutely.
But I think opening your eyes to the possibilities and being more creative and thinking outside the box is going to be a useful long-term strategy too. Nick, I meant to get you more involved in the show. We never had any idea where these conversations are going to go. I do no planning for these shows at all. So let's give you a chance to touch on technology and glamping real quick. We only have a couple minutes left in the show. But where do you see where are you advising your clients to go to be prepared for the future?
Well, generally, I think because it's such a niche industry at the moment, certainly in North America, is I think the primary focus over the next few years is just going to be like pure growth, rather than, I don't think it's going to get particularly sophisticated for a good few years just yet on the purely glamping side, especially with, you know, more, as you say, mar and par sort of sites, you know, setting up before, like, you know, maybe a hotel company, as someone said earlier, might come in, I don't know, 5 years time and buy out one of like the auto camps or one of the bigger ones. I think it's going to be then when you're going to start to see more sophistication. That what I personally do to just stay ahead is look at other industries. So the hotel industries that are more established. There's a little niche community at the minute that they're interested in short-term rentals, but particularly sort of Airbnb, individual houses and properties. And there's a little niche community at the minute that's sort of full of tech investors and that kind of thing. And they're really obviously up to speed with how the technology is moving. So I focus on, I sort of like look towards them a little bit. There's a guy called Richard Fertig. I'm not sure how aware you guys are of him, and he is very much interested in that kind of thing. So I just look around, see what other industries are doing, and just try and sort of keep one step ahead. And so hopefully, Glampitect can sort of advise the clients, as you say, and sort of help our clients keep one step ahead too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Nick. I think we're always at the point, as we are almost every week, I feel like, Cara, where we just want to do another hour and continue these great conversations that we're having. But everybody's got to go. Everybody's got other commitments. So we really appreciate all of you guys joining us for another episode of MC Fireside Chats. Nick, your expertise with Glampitect, if you want to pop your link there in the chat there, you can share it with everybody else. Kevin and Isaac, who dropped off again, unfortunately, just had some bad connection issues, but we got to talk about them, about some of the fascinating ways that glamping is evolving in their business there in Daniel Boone National Forest, and how things can evolve and grow around them. And then, as always, Mike and Duncan, really appreciate you guys joining us, giving your perspective on things that you're seeing both at CRR and Papoose Pond there in Maine. And Cara, as always, here with me from the Canadian Camping and RV Council. So any parting thoughts, final words, Cara, anybody else before we head out?
No, great show as always. I appreciate everybody's contributions here for sure. I think it's my first time being called the Grinch on the show, which surprises me. We broke the record now. I love this industry and really appreciate everybody and your time and contribution to the show and the industry as a whole overall.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Again, as a reminder, you can watch us as a podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, all those kinds of places immediately after. Well, I just said watch. You can't watch. I lied. You can listen. But you can watch previous episodes on moderncampground.com and mcfiresidechats.com as well. So we will see you next week for our RV industry focus show. I have another cool bunch of special guests lined up, as well as our recurring guests from the industry as well. So thank you guys for joining us. I really appreciate it. And we will see you all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of MC Fireside Chats, hosted by Brian Searl and Cara Csizmadia. Have a suggestion for a future show, or want to see your campground or company as part of an episode? Email us at hello@moderncampground.com. Join us next week for another episode. And don't miss the latest outdoor hospitality news and commentary from around the world at moderncampground.com.